My name is Barbara van Schewick. I'm a professor here at the law school and the director of the Center for Internet and Society. I have a PhD in computer science and a law degree, and I've worked on net neutrality for the past 19 years. The 2010 and 2015 net neutrality rules in the US were based on my work, as were the Canadian rules on zero rating and the Indian rules on zero rating and the European Union net neutrality guidelines. Finally, I served as a technical advisor for the California net neutrality law that took effect in January. I'm glad we are here today because the open internet's future is in doubt. In 2017, the Federal Communications Commission abolished all net neutrality protections and abdicated its duty to ensure the nation's communications networks, the nation's most important communication infrastructure, remains open and free. The repeal took effect last June, leaving us unprotected for the first time in the US history since the internet's inception. At its heart, net neutrality is the idea that we, the people who use the internet, get to decide what we do online. We get to choose what sites we visit, what apps to use, and what videos to watch. Companies like Comcast, AT&T, and Verizon that we pay to get online don't get to influence our choices. Net neutrality ensures that these companies, Comcast, Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, don't get to block, slow down, or speed up apps and sites, and they can't charge websites for fast lanes to their subscribers or charge sites to get to subscribers at all. That's crucial, because if your ISP blocks or slows down a website, you just can't use it, and the service can't compete. Even more vitally, net neutrality protections ensure that every speaker has a chance to be heard, no matter the size of their wallets or the color of their skin. College students with an idea and a little bit of savings can invent Reddit or the next Reddit without having to find money to pay off Comcast, AT&T, Verizon, and more. It's easy to take that for granted, that you get to use whatever apps and services you like, or can start a blog or a company without getting permission from phone and cable companies. But this is only because we've always had net neutrality in the US. Initially, net neutrality was baked into the technology of the internet. Data travels over the internet in packets. Originally, internet service providers, the companies we pay to get online, and we also call them ISPs, so originally, ISPs weren't able to look into these data packets, so they couldn't see what people were doing online. As a result, ISPs couldn't distinguish between the content and services traveling over their websites, and so they couldn't treat them differently. That was the original architecture of the internet. But internet technology changed. By the mid-1990s, ISPs had the ability to peer deeply into these packets in real time to see what users were doing online. This so-called deep packet inspection technology allowed ISPs to see what sites and services people were using and to discriminate amongst them. Today, this is how your ISP knows what websites and services you visit and how much data you use per month. As deep packet inspection technology evolved, the FCC recognized the threat this would cause to user choice and free speech online. So the FCC, under both Democratic and Republican leadership, stepped in over and over to stop phone and cable companies from interfering with what we do online. For instance, President Bush's first FCC chairman ordered an ISP to stop blocking an online calling service. Bush's second chairman ordered Comcast to stop blocking peer-to-peer services, including BitTorrent. When ISPs fought back in the courts, the FCC responded by adopting comprehensive net neutrality protections in 2010 and then again in 2015. Thus, Net neutrality didn't magically appear for the first time in 2015 when the FCC adopted the latest iteration of its net neutrality protections. It was the law of the land in the United States from the internet's inception until the repeal took effect last June. Other countries haven't been so fortunate. For example, the European Union had no net neutrality protections until 2015, and phone and cable companies took full advantage. So for instance, my husband's grandmother in Germany couldn't call us over Skype because her provider was blocking Skype on her cell phone. In the UK, online games stopped working in the evening because the ISPs were cracking down on peer-to-peer. In the US, we have seen the abuses now that there are no protections, and we are starting to see them again here in the US with unlimited plans that aren't actually unlimited, mobile ISPs slowing down online video, low data caps on home internet service to discourage cord cutting, and reports that Sprint is throttling Skype. But why does it really matter? Let's take a deeper look at 4 practices that ISPs are now allowed to engage on after the repeal of net neutrality and the harms that flow from them. Take, for instance, what happens when an internet service provider blocks a site or service. When your ISP blocks a website or service you want to use, it literally won't work for you. So if you want to use Skype, you can't place a call. If you go to a website, it won't load. If you try to watch a video on Netflix, there is nothing, not even a buffering. There is nothing you can do about that because the only way for you to reach that website is through your ISP. So ultimately, blocking allows ISPs to interfere with the vibrant free markets that rely on the internet, by determining what you can and cannot do online, and gives them the power to pick winners and losers online. These are not hypothetical concerns. Let's take a non-obvious example, ADT, the security company. If you choose them as a way to monitor your home for burglary or fire, their system uses your broadband internet connection to send alarm signals and video feeds to one of ADT's offices and to allow you to control and watch your system remotely. But broadband companies, including Comcast, offer their own home and business security systems. Without a ban on blocking, Comcast can simply stop competing alarm systems from communicating over the internet at all. That could be a life or death issue. Many cash-strapped municipalities, including Detroit, Las Vegas, or Salt Lake City, won't send out a fire truck or a police car unless they are provided with video or first-person confirmation that it's a real problem, not a false alarm. That means if you aren't there and your system can't upload video to your security provider, you can't get help. And if an ISP isn't prohibited from blocking, there's no one you can turn to get your system working, even if that blocking means that your home or business burns down. This has happened repeatedly to ADT customers. In one instance in Puerto Rico, the blockage went on for 2.5 months, a long time to go without a functioning home security system, so long that ADT had to stop selling new systems. This happened when net neutrality rules weren't in effect after a court had struck down the FCC's 2010 protections, and the blocking only stopped once the FCC passed the 2015 protections. Thus, net neutrality protections matter. They make a difference in the real world. The second issue with blocking by ISPs is censorship. Without a no-blocking rule, ISPs can simply black hole legal sites that they don't like or which are politically unpopular, whether that's a message board for Antifa or a site that legally sells ammunition. We saw this happen in Canada. In 2005, Canada's second largest ISP, an ISP called TELUS, was in a labor dispute with the Telecommunications Workers Union. The workers were using a website to discuss strategies during the strike and to organize and share information. TELUS said that website was a threat to its business, and so it blocked it. And as a result, no customer of TELUS's internet service could access that site. The lack of a no blocking rule also opens up ISPs to political pressure. With no rule against blocking, politicians across the political spectrum and at all levels of governments could pressure ISPs to block sites, either publicly or behind the scenes. You might think this sounds really far-fetched. That wouldn't happen in a democracy. But it did happen in the UK, which didn't have rules as strong as the United States. And so there, in the around 2013, the government pressured ISPs to widely block content that was harmful to children, which led to much collateral damage. Imagine now your internet service provider gets to decide what content is harmful to children. So in the process, UK ISPs blocked websites that educated young people about eating disorders. They blocked the websites of churches and digital rights organizations, all under the heading harmful to children. Second practice, slow down or speeding up. Instead of blocking a website, an ISP could selectively slow down or speed up a website or service, or even a whole class of service, like all online video. This practice is often referred to as throttling. In the online world, slowing down a service isn't that different from blocking it. We've all grown impatient in ways that we hardly even understand. If a website is slow to load, we instinctively reach for the back button. In fact, studies show that tiny differences in load times, difference in hundreds of milliseconds of delay, affect how long people stay on a site, how much they spend, and whether they come back. So just like blocking, slowing down services puts them at a competitive disadvantage. It's more subtle than blocking, but just as effective. So imagine that in the mid-2000s, nearly all broadband ISPs also sold TV service. If they had slowed down all online video services, saying, this will make people cancel their cable subscription, they could have made services like YouTube fail in their infancy. That would have had real costs, economically and culturally. Take, for instance, Stanford grad Issa Rae. Frustrated that there was no such thing as a black female nerd on television, Issa Rae got her friends together and shot a short first episode of what she called The Misadventures of Awkward Black Girl. She had almost no money at the time, but after putting that episode online in 2011, she got a small cult following. She then put out a Kickstarter hoping for $10K to make a series and ended up raising $56,000. The series drew a lot of attention, and a few years later, Issa used her millions of viewers to pitch HBO and turned the web series into the critically acclaimed show Insecure, which recently finished its third season on HBO. She created, wrote, and starred in the series, garnering 2 Golden Globe and 1 Emmy nominations for her acting. In a world where online video services are throttled and broadcast and cable TV are the only game in town, Rae and thousands like her could have never broken out, found audiences, and broadened all of our cultural horizons. Third practice. After the net neutrality repeal, ISPs like Verizon, AT&T, or Comcast are free to charge every website a fee just to be visible to the ISP subscribers and block those websites that don't pay the fee. These fees are known as access fees. So for instance, if the LA Times or your local school didn't pay your ISP this fee, you couldn't get to their website. That would fundamentally change how the internet has operated in the US over the past 30 years. In the US, consumers have always paid their ISP to get access to the entire internet, not just to the websites that have paid their ISPs. And companies that use the internet to reach their customers, so the other side of the picture, have always simply paid for their own access to the internet. They have never had to pay additional fees to their customers' ISPs. ISPs have wanted to change that since 2006, but the FCC's 2010 and 2015 net neutrality protections prohibited them from doing so. What's the economic effect of access fees? Access fees would allow ISPs to increase costs for business across the entire economy, but they would crush startups and small businesses that can't pay the fees. Take the story of Steve Huffman and Alexis Ohanian. After graduating from the University of Virginia in 2005, they started a website to let people upload interesting links and discuss them. With $12,000 in funding from a startup accelerator, Ohanian, Huffman, and their third co-founder, a kid named Aaron Swartz, lived in a small apartment above a pizzeria in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Aaron Swartz even slept in the kitchen cupboard. Without many users, they at first had to go out and find their own content to showcase on the site. But because servers, bandwidth, and RAM were cheap, they were able to keep going until they started getting a critical mass of users and get their next investment of $80,000. The site was called Reddit, and today, Reddit is one of the top 5 most visited sites in the US, with thousands of communities, from entomology to origami, where people share and discuss those interests passionately. But in a world without net neutrality, where websites have to pay access fees to every ISP simply so they are accessible to that ISP's customers, Reddit would have never been born. We know with $12,000, they wouldn't have been able to pay every single ISP around the country. Finally, after the net neutrality repeal, our ISPs are now free to charge websites a fee so that their websites load faster or reach people easier. This is often called fast lanes or paid prioritization. ISPs have long wanted to offer fast lanes to companies that pay them a fee. These fast lanes would give better service to companies when their data travels over our ISP's access network. So see the person in the house, that's us in our home. And so the fast lanes would speed up the data and the final step when the data comes to us when our ISPs transports it to our house. These fast lanes have never existed in the United States and have been formally prohibited since 2010. Fast lanes would allow ISPs to speed up the content of companies that pay the money, while those that can't afford to pay languish in the slow lane. This arrangement distorts competition by benefiting deep-pocketed incumbents over new entrants into a marketplace. Since every millisecond counts, startups that want to compete against Google, Facebook, or Amazon would have to find money somewhere to get into the fast lane. All the most clever engineering in the world to make a website fast can't win if the site's traffic is stuck in the slow lane. Think back to Reddit. Reddit was competing for users' time and attention against the likes of Yahoo News, Google News, CNN, and the New York Times, deep-pocketed companies that could have afforded a fast lane. If Reddit had had to pay so their site was as fast as the ones of its well-financed competitors, they could not have competed. But since fast lanes didn't exist, Reddit was able to beat the incumbents by simply building a better product. But fast lanes wouldn't just hurt startups. Imagine a simple bed and breakfast that wants customers to book directly on their site. If they are in the slow lane and Expedia or Marriott is not, they will lose out long term. In addition, every sector of the economy would need to pay these fees, allowing ISPs to create a de facto tax on businesses in every sector of the economy, large and small alike. And finally, fast lanes would harm smaller speakers and those without deep pockets. If the streaming music from a college radio station constantly breaks up, or a live stream from a local church constantly buffers while Spotify and Netflix are spotless, these smaller voices will only get smaller. Allowing these practices would fundamentally change the internet as we know it. That's why Chairman Pai's 2017 repeal of net neutrality was so dangerous. He didn't just tinker at the edges of previous administrations' work. He abolished all net neutrality protections for the first time ever in the US. In fact, he went even further. His 2017 repeal order reinterpreted the law, concluding the FCC has no legal authority whatsoever to protect us against abuses by the companies we pay to get online. Given that we live in the internet age, this literally stripped the word communications from the Federal Communications Commission. Pai's rationale is that ISPs can just be trusted to do the right thing. And if they do not, Americans have lots of choices for how they get online. It's a naive stance at best. Most Americans have little or no choice for internet access at home. I live in the middle of Silicon Valley, and I have exactly one internet service provider to choose from. And the FCC just approved the merger of T-Mobile and Sprint, which would move us from 4 national wireless carriers to 3. It also ignores how vital the internet is to every aspect of our lives. Historically, we have treated industries that are critical to our economy and rights with fairness principles and oversight. Delta can't refuse to sell you a ticket because of your political views. UPS and FedEx have to ship goods from any legal seller, whether they are selling peace flags or gun parts. Last summer, we saw what happens when you have an FCC that declares it is powerless to oversee the on-ramps to the internet. In the midst of the worst wildfire in California history, Santa Clara firefighters were called in to help battle the fires consuming Northern California. They used a mobile connection to help coordinate the thousands of firefighters and vehicles that were scrambling to stop the rampaging fire. In the midst of this maelstrom, Verizon throttled them to a trickle. Despite firefighters' desperate plea for help, Verizon wouldn't restore service unless the firefighters paid for a plan with a higher data cap, forcing the firefighters to rely on personal devices to keep their systems running. Chairman Pai didn't do anything, and he never said a single word about the incident. Verizon's practices put Californians' lives at stake, and he literally thought it was not his problem. But that is the problem. That's why people are fighting to restore net neutrality in the courts, in Congress, and in the states. Last year, California passed a law that restores net neutrality for California. It's the only state-level law in the country that truly brings back all of the net neutrality protections that the FCC eliminated. That's why it's widely viewed as a model for other states, and why the law scared the federal government and ISPs so much they sued to stop it hours after it was signed into law. The ISPs Playbook is consistent. They publicly say they love net neutrality, but behind the scenes, they fight it at every turn. They defend the net neutrality repeal in court, lobby incessantly to prevent real net neutrality, and sue states that step in to protect their citizens. AT&T paid $600,000 to Michael Cohen, the president's lawyer, to support AT&T's campaign to kill net neutrality. A telecom trade association called Broadband for America paid to have millions of fake anti-net neutrality comments filed with the FCC using stolen identities, many of them by dead people. In California, ISPs spent at least $6 million lobbying against the net neutrality law, and even paid groups to robocall senior citizens with scary messages saying that the California net neutrality law would bump up their cell phone bills by $30 a month. The ISP's fallback position tried to get Congress to pass the Swiss cheese version of net neutrality, full of holes to exploit, and hope that no one notices that the bills they support are net neutrality in name only. That's a problem. ISPs have many ways to pick winners and losers online. To be effective, a net neutrality law needs to protect against all of them. So where are we at now? Earlier this month, a federal court narrowly upheld two key parts of the net neutrality repeal: the elimination of net neutrality and the abdication of oversight over broadband. In an unusual move, two of the three judges, basically the majority of the panel, said that the FCC's legal analysis was incompatible with any natural reading of the law and unhinged from the realities of modern broadband services. This is a direct quote. But the hands were tied by a Supreme Court decision from 2005. That's what they thought. The court kept the repeal in place, but sent it back to the FCC to fix issues related to public safety, broadband subsidies for low-income families, and broadband deployment. And finally, perhaps most importantly, the court struck down the part of the repeal order that prohibited the states from enacting their own net neutrality laws. This cleared a major roadblock for state net neutrality laws. For complicated legal reasons, California still has to wait before it can finally enforce its law. But in the meantime, other states can start passing their own net neutrality laws, expanding the net neutrality battleground. At the federal level last year, the Senate passed, on a bipartisan basis, an act to undo the 2015 appeal. And then this spring, the House, in a different session of Congress, passed a bill that directly restored the 2015 net neutrality protections. But when it got sent over to the Senate, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell declared it dead on arrival, despite the fact that a Republican-controlled Senate had approved the restoration of these protections just the year before. That logjam defies public sentiment. Outside of Washington, D.C., net neutrality isn't a partisan issue. University of Maryland School for Public Policy conducted a poll shortly after the repeal and found that 86% of Americans oppose the repeal of the 2015 net neutrality protections. And that includes 82% of Republicans and 90% of Democrats. That's consistent with other polling and basically makes net neutrality more popular than vanilla ice cream. The ongoing battle can seem frustrating and fuel resignation that in politics, it's only money that matters. But it's not time to despair or give up hope. The history of net neutrality shows that smart policy can win out over phone and cable companies' generous campaign donations to politicians from both parties. Things have looked bleak for net neutrality before. When Verizon convinced a federal court to strike down the FCC's 2010 net neutrality protections, people in DC thought no one would care if they simply replaced the 2010 protection with some toothless substitute. But grassroots groups such as Fight for the Future and Demand Progress refused to settle for meaningless protection. John Oliver picked up on their work, and millions of Americans flooded and crashed the FCC's website with comments demanding real protections. Thousands of startups from every state in the country raised their voices. Advocates for communities of color made clear that net neutrality was a social justice issue. They were joined by many other groups, including the US Conference of Catholic Bishops, the National Association of Realtors, and the Writers Guild. Together, they forced the FCC to ditch its first proposal and adopt strong net neutrality rules, grounded in real authority, and the resulting protections were upheld in federal court twice. One final example. In the summer of 2018, while AT&T was ferociously fighting the California net neutrality law, a California Assembly committee gutted the bill in a dramatic vote that amended the bill before the committee had even heard testimony. Veteran political reporters said they'd never seen such an inversion of the political process. The committee thought they could get away with it because the bill still said net neutrality in the title. But internet users revolted, self-organizing online and off. They crowdfunded billboards, hammered lawmakers with calls and at local meetings, projected giant images on an AT&T building in Oakland, and even left scathing reviews on lawmakers' local offices on Google Maps. Within weeks, the bill was back from the dead, with all the core protections restored, and the lawmaker who had gutted the bill amazingly morphed into its loudest champion. Those are examples of democracy in action, made possible by an internet that is open and free. It's a fool's game to predict the future, but I will say this. This fight is far from over. ISPs may have more money and more lobbyists, but that doesn't mean they get to win. They only win if we let them. Thank you.